The second shot went 50 yards and veered 15 ft left. The third shot tumbled end over end and landed 45 wide short. But here's what mattered. The tube didn't explode. The operator didn't die. And the rocket motor generated enough velocity to potentially damage a tank. Army ordnance observers watching from behind sandbags saw exactly what they needed, a portable concept that might actually work. General Gladian Barnes, Chief of Research and Development for Army Ordnance, saw the demonstration and immediately ordered development to continue. By June 1942, they had a designation, the M1 rocket launcher. By July, someone noticed the tube looked like a musical instrument comedian Bob Burns played on radio, a long pipe contraption he called a bazooka. The name stuck faster than official paperwork could prevent it. Now came the problems. The M1 launched a 3.5 lb rocket with a shaped charge warhead designed to penetrate armor. Shaped charges work through a fascinating physics phenomenon. An explosive line with a copper cone focuses the blast into a superheated jet of metal plasma that cuts through steel like a cutting torch. In theory, the M1's warhead could penetrate over 4 in of armor plate in theory. In practice, accuracy was atrocious. At 50 yards point-blank range for tank combat, the rocket might land anywhere within a 20 ft circle. At 100 yards, you were essentially aiming at a general direction and hopping. The problem wasn't the warhead or the motor. The problem was the smooth bore tube. Without anything to stabilize the rocket's flight, tiny variations in motor thrust or wind conditions would send the projectile spinning randomly. Sometimes it flew straight, sometimes it tumbled, sometimes it corkscrewed through the air like a drunk pigeon. Field tests in late 1942 showed the scope of the disaster. Soldiers at Fort Benning fired 200 test shots at stationary tank targets at 75 yards. Hit rate 38%. Against a moving target, hit rates dropped below 20%. Officers watching these tests did grim math. If your bazooka team only hits 1 shot in 5, and you only get 1 shot before that tank's machine gunner kills you, you're not stopping tanks. You're volunteering for suicide missions. By December 1942, Army Ordnance faced a choice. Scrap the bazooka program entirely or fix the accuracy problem before thousands of these useless tubes shipped to soldiers who would trust their lives to them. The proposal landed on Colonel William Crower's desk at Aberdeen Proving Ground in January 1943 like a grenade without a pin. A civilian ordnance consultant named Henry Mohaupt had spent 3 weeks analyzing the bazooka's accuracy failures and concluded the Army was approaching the problem backwards. Instead of trying to perfect the rocket motor or adjust the warhead weight, he suggested they rifle the launch tube, cut spiral grooves inside the smooth bore just like a traditional firearm. Crozier's response, according to meeting minutes, was immediate. Absolutely not. His reasoning seemed sound to everyone in that room. Rifling works by forcing a bullet to spin as it travels down a barrel. The grooves cut into the barrel engage with the bullet's surface, imparting rotational velocity. This gyroscopic spin stabilizes the bullet's flight. But the bazooka wasn't firing a bullet. It was firing a rocket with its own motor still burning. Crozier argued that forcing a rocket to spin while its motor was creating forward thrust would create unpredictable aerodynamic forces. The weapon might become even less accurate or worse. The rocket could tumble and detonate prematurely. There was another concern that Crozier didn't say out loud, but everyone understood. They'd already manufactured 14,000 M1 bazookas. These weapons were in production at 3 factories. Some were already created for shipment to North Africa. If rifling proved necessary, every single tube would need to be either scrapped or recalled and remanufactured. The cost would run into millions of dollars. The delay would mean troops going into combat, possibly the upcoming Sicily invasion without adequate anti-tank weapons. Mohaupt pushed back. And this is where the story gets interesting. He wasn't some academic theorist. He was a Swiss-born engineer who'd worked extensively on shaped charge warhead design before the war. He'd helped develop the principles behind the bazooka's penetrating warhead. And he brought data. His calculations showed that the rocket motor's burn time 2 seconds was actually an advantage. If the tube's rifling spun the rocket during that brief acceleration phase, the projectile would maintain stabilized flight for the remaining 2 to 3 seconds of flight time. The spin wouldn't fight the motor thrust. It would complement it. He also pointed out something embarrassing. The Germans were already doing this. Intelligence reports from captured Panzer launchers, Germany's reverse-engineered copy of captured American bazookas, showed the Germans had added rifling to their tubes, and their accuracy was measurably better than the American original. The meeting ended with Crozier denying the proposal. His written rejection cited insufficient testing data and unacceptable modification risk to approved ordnance. In military bureaucracy language, that meant we're not gambling on your theory when we have a working design, even if that design doesn't work very well. Mohaupt had one card left. He knew Captain Skinner from earlier shape charge development work. Skinner, despite being Army, had a reputation for pushing unconventional solutions. More importantly, Skinner had General Barnes' ear. So Mohaupt did what frustrated engineers have done since engineering was invented. He went around the official channels. Within a week, Skinner had arranged for Mohaupt to brief Barnes directly. The general listened to 15 minutes of explanation about gyroscopic stability, rocket motor physics, and German intelligence reports. Then he made a decision that would reshape American anti-armor doctrine, approve construction of 3 rifled prototypes for comparison testing. If Mohaupt's theory failed, the project dies. If it succeeds, full production modifications begin immediately, regardless of cost. Crozier got overruled by his superior, which made the upcoming test personal. The standard military response to being overruled is to ensure the test conditions make success as difficult as possible. If rifling failed under rigorous testing, Crozier would be proven right. If it succeeded, he'd order the modifications and take credit for thorough verification. Either way, institutional protocol was satisfied. The test date was set for January 28, 1943. Aberdeen Proving Ground. Captured German Panzer IV armor plate. 20 shots with standard smooth-bore bazookas. 20 shots with Mohaupt's rifled prototypes. Everything measured, documented, witnessed. Before we get to that frozen morning at Aberdeen, you need to understand why spinning a rocket would make it punch through 8 in of steel instead of 4. The physics here gets fascinating, and it's not what most people think. First, let's talk about what happens when a shaped charge warhead hits armor. The warhead contains an explosive charge behind a copper cone. Imagine an ice cream cone made of copper point facing backward toward the explosive. When the warhead detonates, the explosive wave collapses that copper cone inward at speeds exceeding 20,000 ft per second. This collapse converts the copper into a superheated jet of metal plasma, a stream so energetic it behaves more like a fluid than a solid. This jet traveling at about Mach 25 impacts the armor and essentially flows through it, creating a narrow but deep penetration channel. Here's the critical part. The jet forms in microseconds, about 20 millionths of a second after detonation. The geometry has to be perfect. If the warhead hits at an angle, even 15 degrees off perpendicular, penetration drops by 30%. At 30 degrees off, you might not penetrate at all. The jet forms but spreads across the armor surface instead of driving through. This is why smooth-bore bazooka accuracy was such a disaster. A rocket tumbling through the air might hit the tank sideways, nose up, or at any random angle. Even when it hit, it often failed to penetrate properly. Now add spin. A rifled tube imparts roughly 2,000 rotations per minute to the rocket as it launches. This rotational velocity creates gyroscopic stability through basic physics. The same principle that keeps a spinning top upright. A spinning object resists changes to its axis of rotation. For the bazooka rocket, this meant once it left the tube pointing at the target, it stayed pointing at the target throughout its flight. No tumbling, no wobbling, no random orientation changes. But Mohaupt understood something deeper. The spin didn't just stabilize the rocket's trajectory. It stabilized the shaped charge jet formation itself. Research from 1941 by Swiss physicist Franz Rudolf Tomk had shown that even microscopic rotation in a shape-charge warhead could affect jet coherence. Too much spin over 10,000 RPM would tear the jet apart through centrifugal force, but moderate spin in the 2 to 3,000 RPM range actually helped the jet maintain coherence by evening out tiny imperfections in the copper liner. Think of it like this. An unspun rocket hitting a tank is like throwing a dart while blindfolded. You might hit, and even if you do hit, the dart might strike at a weird angle. A spun rocket is like throwing a dart while sighted with the dart itself engineered to correct its flight path. You hit where you aim and you hit point first. The math supported this. Mohauct's calculations predicted rifled rockets would maintain nose-forward orientation within 2 degrees of their launch axis over a 100-yard flight. This meant the shape-charged jet would form perpendicular to the armor surface almost every time, maximizing penetration. The smooth-bore rockets were hitting with angular variations up to 45 degrees, which explained why penetration results were so inconsistent. There was also a secondary effect nobody had predicted initially. The rifled tube's grooves created a slight gas seal as the rocket accelerated. This seal meant more motor exhaust pressure pushed the rocket forward instead of escaping around it. Velocity increased by roughly 8% from 280 ft/s to just over 300. That extra velocity translated to harder impact force and slightly better penetration even before the shape charge detonated. So the promise was this. Rifling would deliver consistent nose-first impacts at higher velocity, which would generate perfectly formed shape-charged jets hitting perpendicular to armor, which should in theory produce 8 in penetration depth at 50 yards. That's double what smooth-bore bazookas achieved on their best shots. And more importantly, it would be consistent. Every shot, same result. Theory is beautiful. Testing is where theories go to die. January 28, 1943 came in cold at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Temperature at 600 hours, 18 degrees F with wind gusts hitting 20 mph off the Chesapeake Bay. The kind of cold that makes metal burn your hands and turns breath into fog. Not ideal conditions for testing experimental weapons, but the Sicily invasion was scheduled for summer. And if these rifled bazookas were going to ship with the assault forces, testing couldn't wait for better weather. The test range setup was simple and brutal. 200 wide downrange, engineers had mounted 10 captured German armor plates on wooden frames, actual Panzer IV hull sections seized in North Africa. Each plate measured 8 mm thick, the standard frontal armor that was shrugging off most Allied anti-tank weapons. Behind each plate, they'd positioned clay blocks to capture the shape-charged jet and measure penetration depth. Beside the armor plate stood standard steel plates in graduated thicknesses, 4 in, 5 in, 6 in, 7 in, 8 in. These would determine maximum penetration capability. The observation bunker held 15 officers and engineers, including Colonel Crozier, General Barnes, Captain Skinner, and Henry Mohaupt. Protocol required official witnesses for any test that might alter approved ordnance. Several Aberdeen ballistic specialists attended to verify measurements. A stenographer recorded everything. The atmosphere, according to Skinner's later account, was tense enough to snap. The test protocol was straightforward. 20 shots with standard M1 smoothbore bazookas at 50 yards,